You know something really scary? I think that this no thing is deep, deep.
In 1973, when Ali MacGraw married Steve McQueen, the world saw Hollywood royalty coming together. She was fresh off an Oscar nomination for Love Story. He was the highest-paid actor on the planet, and their wedding photos showed two impossibly beautiful people who seemed destined for each other. The press called them the Golden Couple. Fan magazines ran features about their desert ranch and blended family. 5 years later, MacGraw walked away from it all. The marriage, her career, her place in Hollywood, and for decades, she wouldn't say why. Now at 85, Ali MacGraw has finally broken her silence about what really happened behind closed doors with the man they called the King of Cool. The details she's revealed paint a picture that's far darker than anyone outside that marriage could have imagined. Elizabeth Alice MacGraw wasn't born into the Hollywood system. She grew up in Pound Ridge, New York, the daughter of Richard MacGraw, a commercial artist, and Frances, who worked in the arts. Her childhood was comfortable but not wealthy, and her parents encouraged creativity while expecting her to forge her own path. After graduating from Wellesley College in 1960 with a degree in art history, Ali headed straight for New York City. Her first apartment was a tiny walk-up in Greenwich Village. She worked as a photographic assistant at Harper's Bazaar, earning barely enough to cover rent and groceries. But she was in the center of the creative universe in the early 1960s, surrounded by photographers, designers, and artists who were reshaping American culture. Her boss at Harper's Bazaar was the legendary fashion photographer Melvin Sokolsky. Within a year, photographers started asking if she'd step in front of the camera instead of working behind it. She had the look that defined the era: dark hair, striking features, high cheekbones, and a natural elegance. But modeling didn't satisfy her. By 1965, she'd moved into styling and photo editing, building connections with influential people in New York's creative world. Her path to acting was almost accidental. In 1967, she married Robert Evans, who'd just been named head of production at Paramount Pictures. Evans saw his wife in a Chanel commercial and thought she had something special on camera, a natural quality that couldn't be taught. He pushed her toward acting, and in 1969 she landed a supporting role in Goodbye Columbus. The film was modest, earning around $9 million at the box office, but MacGraw's performance caught attention. Variety wrote that she had an unforced naturalism that makes her scenes feel like real life rather than movie moments. She didn't seem like she was performing. She seemed like someone the camera had simply captured being herself. That authenticity would make her a star, but it would also make her vulnerable to a man who needed to control everything around him. Love Story hit theaters in December 1970 and became a cultural phenomenon that nobody saw coming. Made for just over $2 million, the film grossed more than $136 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of the year. MacGraw played Jenny Cavallari, a working-class Radcliffe student who marries a wealthy Harvard boy and then dies of leukemia. The line, "Love means never having to say you're sorry," became part of the cultural vocabulary. MacGraw played Jenny with such emotional honesty that millions of people cried in theaters across America. She won the Golden Globe for Best Actress and earned an Academy Award nomination. At 31, Ali MacGraw appeared on the cover of Time magazine. She was named to the International Best Dressed list. Fashion magazines featured her knit hats, her long hair, her simple style that women everywhere tried to copy. Her marriage to Robert Evans, who was producing hits like The Godfather and Chinatown, made them one of the most powerful couples in Hollywood. When their son Josh was born on January 16, 1971, it seemed like her life was perfect. Fan magazines ran features about how she balanced motherhood with stardom. Behind the scenes, MacGraw was struggling. In a 2016 interview with People magazine, she admitted she never felt comfortable with fame. She didn't understand the business side of Hollywood and found the social obligations exhausting. She was trying to balance being a new mother with being a movie star, and she felt increasingly isolated in her marriage to Evans, who was consumed with running Paramount. In 1972, she was cast opposite Steve McQueen in The Getaway, a Sam Peckinpah thriller about bank robbers on the run. McQueen was at the absolute peak of his career. His films Bullet, The Great Escape, The Thomas Crown Affair had made him the most bankable star in the world. He'd commanded $1 million salary when that was almost unheard of. But he also had a reputation in the industry. Directors found him difficult. Co-stars found him controlling. His first wife, Neil Adams, had given up her own dancing and acting career to support his, and their marriage was reportedly strained by his constant infidelities. The chemistry between MacGraw and McQueen on the set of The Getaway was immediate and electric. People who worked on the film later said you could feel the tension between them. In the movie, they played married criminals who are obsessively, destructively in love. The line between performance and reality started to blur. By the time filming wrapped, both of their marriages were falling apart. According to several accounts, including Evans's own memoir, The Kid Stays in the Picture, MacGraw called her husband midway through filming and admitted she'd fallen in love with McQueen. Evans was devastated. He'd been working to save The Godfather from studio interference when his wife told him their marriage was over. The scandal made headlines everywhere. America's sweetheart from Love Story was leaving her husband and young son for Hollywood's notorious bad boy. The press was harsh, particularly toward MacGraw. She was painted as a homewrecker, a woman who'd destroyed 2 marriages for passion. McQueen, meanwhile, was treated with a kind of grudging admiration. Of course, he'd stolen another man's wife. That was Steve McQueen. MacGraw and Evans divorced in 1972. McQueen's divorce from Neil Adams was finalized around the same time. On August 31, 1973, Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen were married in a small ceremony in Cheyenne, Wyoming, far from the Hollywood spotlight. In interviews right after the wedding, MacGraw described the relationship in glowing terms. She told Ladies' Home Journal that Steve was brilliant, passionate, and unlike anyone she'd ever known. She said she'd finally found a partner who understood her completely. But the reality that was unfolding in private was something entirely different. Steve McQueen had clawed his way out of a childhood that would have destroyed most people. Born Terrence Stephen McQueen in 1930 in Beech Grove, Indiana, he was abandoned by his father as an infant. His mother, Julia, was an alcoholic who couldn't care for him consistently. He was passed between relatives, living at various times with his great-uncle in Missouri and in foster care. At 14, Steve was sent to the California Junior Boys Republic in Chino, a reform school for troubled youth. He spent 3 years there before joining the Merchant Marines at 17, then the Marine Corps, where he was court-martialed twice for going AWOL. When he finally made it to New York in the early 1950s to study acting, he was essentially homeless, sleeping on the street, stealing food, doing whatever it took to survive. His breakthrough came slowly: small theater roles, television appearances, and finally the lead in the TV series Wanted Dead or Alive in 19... By the time he met Ali MacGraw, he'd reached the absolute pinnacle of Hollywood success, but he'd never lost the anger, the fear, the deep-seated belief that everything could be taken away at any moment, and he absolutely could not handle being married to a woman who was also a star. In her 1991 memoir Moving Pictures, MacGraw began to hint at the truth about their marriage, though she was still measured in her language. She wrote that McQueen wanted her to give up acting entirely. He didn't want her working with other actors, traveling without him, or being in any situation where other men might admire her. She described how he would read her scripts and veto anything that involved romantic scenes. She wrote about turning down roles in The Great Gatsby and other major films because Steve didn't approve. At the time, she framed it as compromise, as what you do for love. But even in the memoir, there's a wistfulness, a sense of loss. It wasn't until years later, in interviews given in the 2010s, that MacGraw began to use words like controlling, jealous, and abusive to describe the relationship. In a 2018 interview with The Guardian, MacGraw was remarkably candid. She said that McQueen's jealousy was extreme and unmanageable. He would fly into rages if she mentioned other actors. He monitored her phone calls and questioned her about every conversation. He made it clear that he expected her to center her entire life around him, his career, his needs. She described one particularly painful incident involving the Academy Awards. After Love Story, MacGraw remained a member of the Academy and was invited to present at the 1974 ceremony. It was an honor, a chance to maintain her presence in Hollywood. McQueen forbade her to attend. When MacGraw objected, pointing out that it was a professional obligation, McQueen reportedly threatened to leave her if she cared more about the Academy Awards than about him. MacGraw didn't present at the ceremony. She stayed home. The emotional abuse was constant, but harder to define than his explosive jealousy. McQueen would give her the silent treatment for days at a time, refusing to speak or even acknowledge her presence. He criticized her appearance. She was too thin, too heavy, dressed wrong, wore her hair wrong. He questioned her intelligence and her abilities as a mother to Josh. Then, just as suddenly, he would shift. He'd bring flowers, tell her he loved her, promise things would be different. The cycle would repeat endlessly. According to MacGraw, McQueen's cocaine use by the mid-1970s made everything worse. His behavior became increasingly erratic and paranoid. He was convinced she was having affairs, despite the fact that he barely let her out of his sight. She's described waking up in the middle of the night to find him standing over the bed watching her. In a 2019 interview with People magazine, MacGraw said something that captured the full extent of what she'd lost. By the end of the marriage, I had lost myself completely. I was obsessed with Steve from the moment I met him. I wanted to please him, keep him, make him happy. And in doing that, I gave up everything, my career, my friends, my sense of who I was. She described waking up every morning in a state of anxiety, immediately trying to gauge what mood McQueen was in. Her entire day would be planned around managing his emotions, trying to prevent conflict, trying to keep things calm. I was walking on eggshells constantly, she said. I felt like I was disappearing. MacGraw has also acknowledged something that many survivors of abusive relationships struggle with. She loved him. Despite everything, she saw glimpses of the vulnerable man beneath the anger, the frightened boy who'd been abandoned and hurt. She kept believing she could save him, heal him, love him enough that he'd feel secure. The breaking point came in McQueen had been cast in Tom Horn, a Western that would film in Arizona for several months. As always, he expected MacGraw to come with him, to put her life on hold, and be available whenever he needed her. But something in MacGraw had shifted. She'd been in therapy. She'd been talking to friends who gently suggested her marriage wasn't healthy. And she'd been watching her 6-year-old son Josh, who was increasingly confused by the tension. When McQueen announced they'd be going to Arizona, MacGraw said no. She said she wanted to stay in California with Josh. She said she needed time to herself. McQueen was reportedly furious. According to MacGraw's account, he gave her an ultimatum: come with him, or the marriage was over. For years, MacGraw had always backed down at moments like this. This time she didn't. I told him I wasn't going, MacGraw said in a later interview. And I meant it. For the first time in our relationship, I meant it. Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw separated in 1977 and divorced in She was 39 years old, an age when Hollywood was already beginning to write off actresses as too old for leading roles. The media narrative was brutal. MacGraw was portrayed as the woman who destroyed 2 marriages for passion, then walked away when the excitement faded. Gossip columnists suggested she was difficult, that she couldn't handle McQueen's success. McQueen, meanwhile, was cast as the heartbroken husband. The narrative conveniently ignored his controlling behavior, his jealousy, his substance abuse. MacGraw has said that reading about herself during this period was devastating. She couldn't defend herself without revealing private details that would only generate more headlines, so she stayed quiet and absorbed the criticism. Professionally, she struggled. Hollywood has a long memory, and she'd turned down roles for 5 years to accommodate McQueen. Casting directors had moved on to younger actresses. She made Convoy with Sam Peckinpah in 1978 and Just Tell Me What You Want in 1980, but these were modest projects that didn't restore her to the level of stardom she'd enjoyed after Love Story. More importantly, she was dealing with the emotional aftermath of 5 years of psychological abuse. She's described feeling unmoored, unsure of her own judgment, afraid to trust herself. She worried constantly about Josh and the impact the turbulent marriage had on him. She struggled with guilt over the choices she'd made, leaving Robert Evans, staying with McQueen as long as she did, sacrificing her career. Steve McQueen died on November 7, 1980, at age 50, from mesothelioma caused by asbestos exposure, likely from his years of racing cars. MacGraw did not attend his funeral. She said she grieved privately, mourning not the man he'd been but the man he might have been if he'd been able to face his trauma. His death made it harder for her to talk about the marriage. Speaking ill of the dead felt wrong, even when what she would have said was true. Then MacGraw made a decision that surprised everyone in Hollywood. She walked away from the industry almost entirely. She moved to New Mexico in the early 1980s, settling in Tusuc, a small artistic community outside Santa Fe. She bought a modest house, far removed from Beverly Hills mansions and Hollywood parties. She lived simply, focusing on her son, her health, and her healing. MacGraw has been remarkably honest about this period. She's talked about attending Al-Anon meetings to understand codependency and her pattern of losing herself in relationships. She went to therapy regularly. She practiced yoga and meditation. She read extensively about trauma and attachment. I had to learn who I was, she told Oprah Winfrey in a 2011 interview. I'd spent my entire adult life defining myself through men, first Robert, then Steve. I didn't know who Ali was when she wasn't someone's wife. The process was painful but essential. She had to sit with uncomfortable truths about herself, her desperate need for approval, her willingness to sacrifice her own needs, her belief that she could fix broken men through love. She had to forgive herself for the years she'd lost and the choices she'd made. She also had to rebuild her relationship with Josh, who'd been caught in the middle of 2 divorces, and the chaos of her marriage to McQueen. Being a present, stable mother became her priority in ways it hadn't been when she was caught up in Hollywood. Slowly, over years, MacGraw began to find peace. At 85, Ali MacGraw still lives in New Mexico and has found genuine peace. She's done small acting roles over the years on her own terms, including a recurring part on Dynasty in the 1980s. She's become an advocate for animal rights and environmental causes, working with organizations like Animals Asia. But perhaps most importantly, she's become remarkably open about her experiences with abusive relationships. In recent interviews, MacGraw has spoken about how Hollywood's culture enabled McQueen's behavior. Everyone in the industry knew he was controlling and kept his wife isolated, but because he was Steve McQueen, profitable and powerful, no one intervened. The culture protected men like Steve, she told The Guardian in 2018. His behavior was seen as part of his genius, his intensity. If I'd complained publicly, I would have been labeled difficult or bitter. She's also been honest about her own complicity in the relationship dynamic. She was raised in the 1940s and 1950s, when women were taught that their value came from the men they were with, that being accommodating was the highest virtue. I was complicit in my own erasure, she said in one interview. I made choices every day to accommodate Steve's demands. I told myself I was being a good wife, but really I was disappearing. In a 2016 interview with People magazine, she said, I look back at that woman, at me in my 30s, and I just want to hug her and tell her she deserves better. That she doesn't have to shrink herself to make someone else comfortable. MacGraw's willingness to speak honestly has helped validate the experiences of countless women in similar situations, where there's no physical violence, but a gradual erosion of self that's just as damaging. People often ask her why she stayed as long as she did. Her answer is both simple and profound. Because I loved him, and I kept believing it would get better, and I didn't know until I left that I could survive without him. MacGraw has never remarried. She's had relationships but never again allowed a man to define her life. She's close with Josh, who works as an actor and producer, and her grandchildren. She practices yoga daily, reads voraciously, and travels when she wants to. When asked if she has regrets, her answer has evolved over the years. I don't regret loving Steve. He was complicated and damaged, and I saw beauty in him, but I do regret losing myself in the process. I regret the years I spent trying to make him happy at the expense of my own happiness. I regret that I didn't understand sooner that you can love someone and still leave if they're hurting you. Ali MacGraw's story is ultimately one of survival and self-reclamation. She lost years to a relationship that diminished her, but she found the strength to walk away and build a life on her own terms. She's used her platform to speak honestly about psychological abuse and coercive control in ways that have helped other women recognize and name their own experiences. At 85, she seems genuinely at peace with her choices, both the ones she regrets and the ones that saved her. Her willingness to finally tell the truth about her marriage has complicated the mythology around one of Hollywood's biggest stars while validating the experiences of countless women who've lost themselves in toxic relationships. What do you think about MacGraw's decision to speak openly about this painful chapter after so many years of silence? If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe for more untold Hollywood histories and share your thoughts in the comments.